I created a PowerPoint to go along with the information in the textbook, so it's kind of the same information, just streamlined a little bit, and I have some examples to go with it for you. So we'll look through this PowerPoint right now, but if you have your textbook open, it pretty much follows the same concepts in the textbook. So this is a strategy for writing. That's what classifying and dividing is. All right, we've already looked at some other strategies. Last week we looked at two. Does anybody remember what we looked at last week? Compare and contrast is one. Cause and effect was the other. Those are strategies for writing. You can have an entire essay that follows a comparison and contrast pattern, right? You could write an entire essay that compares cars to trucks. That could be the whole focus of the essay. Now, it's going to have a thesis statement, right? If it's an academic writing assignment, if it's, what do we call the writing we do in this class? It started with the E. Expository writing, good. So if it's expository writing, it is based on a thesis statement, right? And a thesis statement is two parts, subject and opinion. So if you're doing expository writing, you're supporting a thesis statement, you're supporting your opinion. You're proving your opinion. Does that make sense? That's what expository writing is. So you could have an entire essay that compares cars to trucks, and you have some kind of opinion about it, like maybe trucks are better than cars, right? That could be your opinion. And you spend the whole rest of the essay either going back and forth between cars and cars and trucks, or you lay out all the arguments for cars first and then all the arguments for trucks next. And you say which one's better, right? You could do that. You don't need to do a whole essay of compare and contrast though. Sometimes you might be writing a different essay and maybe just one of the paragraphs includes comparing and contrasting as a strategy, right? So maybe you're just doing a basic expository essay, a basic persuasive expository essay, which is kind of redundant because if I say expository, it's based on a thesis statement, so it's automatically persuasive, right? Expository writing, the main goal of expository writing is persuasion, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good point. So some source might say that the purpose of expository writing is to inform. I would say that's a secondary purpose. It will inform the reader, like automatically. It will just by its nature inform the reader, but if it's truly expository, it has a thesis statement. And if it has a thesis statement, it has an opinion. And if you have an opinion, the whole rest of your paper should be backing up that opinion. In other words, persuading the reader that your opinion is valid. Okay, so the primary goal of expository writing should be persuasion. All right, so let's say, forget the cars and trucks essay, right? Let's say you could potentially do an entire compare and contrast essay using that one strategy throughout the whole essay to prove your point and to persuade, right? You could persuade somebody by saying, cars, don't go off-road, but trucks do go off-road. Trucks are able to carry huge loads and cars aren't, right? You're comparing and contrasting point by point and saying, look, here's why trucks are better, and you prove your point. That could be done in one essay, one strategy, right? But other times, if you're just writing a basic expository essay that's persuasive in nature, which is actually going to be your first essay assignment, is writing a persuasive essay, sometimes you could use different strategies, right? You could use multiple strategies. So if you're going to write the essay, I think the example I've used before is Chick-fil-A, right? Best fast food restaurant in Georgia or America or whatever. That's the opinion, right? It is the best. The subject, Chick-fil-A. If you want to prove that in an expository essay that's going to persuade the reader, maybe your first paragraph just says Chick-fil-A is the best because they have very clean restaurants, right? And then you could describe the restaurants and say, the parking lots are always neat and tidy and the landscaping is nice. The inside of the restaurant is nice because there's not trash on the floor and, the people come and wipe the trays down, right? You could give descriptions. Maybe your next paragraph is going to say, Chick-fil-A is also the best fast food restaurant in Georgia because their food is the tastiest. And in that paragraph, maybe you want to compare and contrast Chick-fil-A's food to other fast food restaurants. Maybe you just pick one. McDonald's fries are gross because they always put too much salt on them. However, Chick-fil-A's fries are always nice and hot out of the oven and have just the right amount of salt on them, right? So you could compare and contrast between Chick-fil-A and McDonald's in one paragraph of that essay. So you're using the strategy, but only in one section. So the whole essay is not comparing and contrasting Chick-fil-A to McDonald's, just that one paragraph where you're talking about the food versus other fast food places. Does that make sense? And then you could have another paragraph, maybe that has some cause and effect in it. And it says, when you go to a Chick-fil-A, you will leave happy because here's what the people do to ensure that you're a happy customer, right? That's cause and effect, right? Here's the effect is you leave happy. The causes are the service is great, the restaurant is clean, right? Whatever it is. So you can mix these strategies together. Does that make sense? Okay, so we looked at compare and contrast. We talked about cause and effect. So this week, the other strategies are definition, description, and that's what I did last night, and that will be available to you in the recording. And the last one we're going to look at is classifying and dividing. It's a strategy for writing. This one, I probably should have started with this one. I think the next time I teach this class, I'm going to start with this, because this is the most basic organizational strategy, all right, for organizing your thoughts, for organizing your writing. All right, it's all about organization. Classification and division are methods for organizing. All right, two different methods. They're very similar, right? If you classify something, if you divide something, they're very similar ideas, but they're a little bit different. All right, but they are methods for organizing. Lack of organization is bad. Does anyone disagree with that? Does anybody love chaos? No? I bet if I went to some of your houses, I would disagree. You're like, I don't know, not very organized. Look, there's a closet. Lack of organization is bad, right? Wouldn't it be difficult to get dressed in the morning if that's what your closet looked like? Wouldn't that be tough? Probably come to school all mismatched, right? That wouldn't work very well. So lack of organization is a bad thing. When it comes to writing, lack of organization is a bad thing. When it comes to your closet, lack of organization is a bad thing. All right, writing should be organized thinking on paper. That's a good quote right there. Brett, you know who said that? Yeah, me. That's right. I said that. Now, someone else may have said it before me, but if I had to give you a definition, a very broad definition of writing, I would say it's organized thinking on paper. That's what writing is, or on your computer screen now, right? Because most people type their writing now. All right, but that's what it is. It's organized thinking, or that's what it should be. That's what writing should be. It should be organized thinking, right? Because what you put on the computer screen or what you put on your paper, those are your thoughts. The only medium we really have to express our thoughts is words and letters, right? All right, organization when it comes to writing is good. Look at that. Doesn't that just make you feel a whole lot better after seeing that picture of a messy closet? I'll tell you a funny story. When I was single, before I met my wife, I had an organizational strategy, all right, when it came to clothes. I had two classifications. Clean and dirty. That's right. Clean and dirty. That was how I organized my clothes. So I would have piles of clothes. I didn't have a dresser. I didn't use my closet. I didn't have hangers. I had a pile of clean clothes and a pile of dirty clothes. That was it. That was my strategy. It worked, but I have a better strategy now thanks to my wife who organizes everything similar to that picture there. All right, that makes things a lot easier. So when you're writing, it's important to be organized because it helps the reader, and I probably say this on this slide, it allows the reader to identify and understand the writer's ideas. Right? That's what your writing is. If writing is organized thinking, then it's organized ideas on a page. Right? That's what it should be. So think about it like a closet. If I want to find the idea of a shirt, it's a lot easier to find it in this closet than the previous one, right? If I want to find a matching outfit, if I want to find ideas that go together, it's much easier to do when it's organized than if it's not organized. Organization also helps the writer stay on track. It helps the writer stay on track. What do I mean by that? It ensures that you exclude or keep out irrelevant info. So if I'm going to write my essay about Chick-fil-A, I still have my notes up here on the board from last night. If I'm going to write my essay on Chick-fil-A, and I'm going to say Chick-fil-A is the best fast food restaurant because they have the best prices, their food tastes the best, and they have the best service. If those are going to be my three main points. If I'm organized and I realize that, okay, this is going to be one particular section, taste is going to be one particular section, and service is going to be its own section, I'm not going to start talking about how, grocery store food is sometimes better than Chick-fil-A, right? That has no bearing on, money, taste, or service as it comes to the essay. I'm not going to start talking about the time I went to the movies and drove by a Chick-fil-A and someone was fighting in the parking lot. Like, that has no bearing on any of these main points, right? So if you're organized, it keeps you from drifting off. It keeps you from including irrelevant information. Think about it like a closet, right? Look at this closet here. You've got your boots here, your shoes here, your shirts there. Are you going to end up with a beach ball in that closet? Probably not, because there's not a place for it. Does that make sense? So if you're organized, things that don't belong don't end up somewhere in your closet. You go back to the other closet, who knows what's in there, right? There could be all types of, there could be, a dead dog in there for all you know. All right, so it helps you keep things that shouldn't be in your essay out of your essay. Does that make sense? All right, so we're going to talk about two different forms of organization. The first one is classification. What does classification do? It groups similar things together. That's what classifying is. Y'all are just like my class from last night. I give you a PowerPoint, and now all of a sudden everybody's taking notes. That's a good thing, I guess. I didn't realize PowerPoints had that much power to make people take notes. Gives the highlights. I think something about having the words on the screen is probably helpful too, right? Okay. All right, so when we classify, we group similar things together. Scientists classify things, right? When they're dealing with animals and species and things like that, the animal kingdom, they group things according to their similarities, right? So you have, your sharks here, your fish there, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, right? They have things in common. Does that make sense? But it's not just specialists and scientists that organize things and classify things by similarities. We do it too, right? Anybody have a drawer in their home that looks like that? Right? You got your forks in one spot, your spoons in one spot, the knives in another spot. Makes it easy to find things, right? Makes it easy to, if you need a fork, like, okay, it's in the fork section, right? You don't have to rifle around through a whole bunch of silverware. All right, so we do it too. We organize all the time. All right, classification example. I actually had to do a master's research project when I was in school, and I was selfish, which I was allowed to be selfish, and I got to choose my topic of research based on what I was going to do, and that was teach. So I wanted to be selfish. I wanted to learn something that would help me, which is actually going to be something you get to do for this class as well. You're going to have to write a research paper after your persuasive essay. And I'm going to allow you to, I'm going to give you a lot of freedom in your topic, but it has to be related to either your program of study or what you intend to do when you're done at Linear Tech or done with your college education. All right, so mine was related to my college education. I was learning how to be a teacher, and I wanted to be selfish and get something out of it beyond just learning how to do research. So the topic I chose was problems of new teachers. That's a good thing to know, right? If you're going to become a teacher, like what kind of problems do new teachers encounter? Does that make sense? So that was the topic I chose. Actually, let me go back. So that was my topic, and what I had to do, I had to look at other people's research that did the same similar topic, looking at problems of new teachers. And I had to review all of these prior studies, kind of summarize them, and then I had to do my own research and actually decide on a sample of people to question and interview, and then I had to compile that data as well. So what I ended up having to do was a whole lot of classification. All right, the project became, this idea of classification became very crucial to the project itself, to the research. And here's why. All right, this is just from the summary that I did. It says the specific problems that teachers identify and researchers report are difficult to classify. All right, it's difficult to classify these problems because they tend to overlap into other issues deemed problematic. For instance, the problem of using technology in a lesson. It could be a technology problem if the teacher doesn't know how to use the technology, but it could also be a time management problem if the teacher knows exactly how to bring technology into the lesson, yet doesn't have the time to do it. It could also be an administrative or school support problem if the school does not institute a procedure for getting a teacher time in the computer lab, or if the school doesn't have technology, right? So if I asked a group of teachers, what is one problem you have? And 10 of them say, well, we have problems with technology. Well, one might have a problem with getting the technology. One might have a problem with, using the technology. One might have a problem with having the time to use the technology. Does that make sense? So a technology problem could be 3 different things. So it's like, how do you classify these, right? If you ask a group of teachers, new teachers, what kind of problems do you have in the classroom? If you ask 100 teachers, you could get 100 different answers. So I did ask a group of teachers, and I got many different answers, and I had to decide which ones were similar, and I had to group them together. Does that make sense so far? This is all from my research, too. It says, despite the challenge of classifying particular problems of new teachers, many recent studies have succeeded at doing so. However, the different classifications do not remain consistent across the studies. There are similarities between the types of problems that the studies find, but the terminology used by different researchers varies. For example, new teachers that identify themselves as having problems with the school's administration could be referred to by one researcher as an administrative support problem and by another researcher as a relationship with supervisors problem. So they're worded differently. That's a very similar thing, right? Administrative support or relationship with supervisors. Very similar ideas. They could be grouped together as one, right? So I was looking at these different studies, and they're calling things by different names, and I had to figure out what was similar and what was completely different. All right, after I collected my own data, I asked a series of questions to a group of teachers, like, what kind of problems did you expect when before you started teaching? What kind of problems are you having now? And a couple other ones. So after I asked those open-ended questions and got their responses, I had to determine, which responses were similar and which ones were different, and how many classifications, how many groups I could come up with. All right, so this says the process for classifying concerns was subjective due to the qualitative nature of the data collected. All right, and what that means is, if something is subjective, what does that mean? Anybody know? You will know after watching the recording from last night, because that's the big part of description. If something's subjective, say it again. Yeah, all right, there's subjective and there's objective. Objective means it's not at all related to someone's opinion. Subject means it's related to someone's opinion. It's subject to opinion. All right, so that's one of the problems I had. I asked these people open-ended questions. I asked these new teachers, what kind of problems are you experiencing? And, it wasn't just are you experiencing problems with discipline, yes or no? That would be easy. That would be objective, right? Because my opinion doesn't play into it. But since I just asked an open-ended question and they responded in full sentences, I had to pick out the material that was important. And that took a little bit of my own evaluation and judgment. So it was a little bit subjective. And when it says qualitative nature of the data collected, there's 2 types of data. And you might want to know this for when you do your research in this class, possibly. There's qualitative data and quantitative data. 2 different types of data. Qualitative means it's more difficult to measure, right? So if I gave a group of 30 teachers a questionnaire that said, do you experience problems with discipline, yes or no? I could say 10 out of 30 teachers responded yes, right? That would be quantitative, because quantitative means it's quantified, it can be counted easily. Qualitative is different. Qualitative is when you say, what kind of problems do you experience, and then you get a whole bunch of different answers. Quality versus quantity, exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about. So that was part of the problem. But it says the investigator grouped some of the issues together, like discipline and classroom management, because they're similar concepts. Student motivation and student engagement are similar concepts. Relationships with students and communicating with students. So if I had a teacher that said, yeah, my biggest problem is relationships with students, and I have another teacher that says my biggest problem is communicating with students, well, those are 2 similar things. So I group those together as one class, right? One classification. If I didn't do that, I end up with 40 or 50 different problems. It's more difficult to write a research paper about 40 or 50 different things. Does that make sense? So sometimes you have to group things together. Responses were grouped into 17 total categories. Responses shared by at least 2 participants are listed in Table A. The top response, so I did have a table, a little graph, or a visual representation of these problems. The top response, discipline or classroom management, was indicated by 21 of 33 participants. This was the only response shared by a majority of the participants. Concerns about content knowledge and lesson planning had shared responses of 30%, blah, blah, blah. So basically, this is all classification, right? This is what I'm telling the reader. I'm saying, look, I found these problems. Here are the ones that were similar. Here's the number of people that reported this problem. But it was my job to sort through the data and show the reader what goes together and what doesn't. Okay? I think this is the last one. Specific student issues or characteristics received just as many responses as time management and workload. This category, right, category is a classification, encompasses a number of specifically identified issues or characteristics of students. So, when I say, right here, student issues and characteristics, that was a category. But that includes a number of things, like maturity, immaturity, senioritis, attitudes, personal problems, motivation, apathy. That's a whole host of things that all fit into this one category. So if I ask this group of teachers, what problems are you having? And I have one that says student attitude, another that says student immaturity. Those are pretty similar, right? Immaturity, attitude, those are student issues. So I group those all together as one category. Does that make sense? Do you see how I did this? This is a very good example of classification. All right, next strategy is dividing or division. All you really need to know is that dividing is breaking something up into parts. That's the key to it, is breaking something up into parts. This is a good strategy for complicated or multi-step plans. If you have a complicated plan or something that involves a lot of steps, you should divide it up into those individual steps, right, to get that point across to the reader that, hey, here's all the steps that you need to know. This is a good strategy for all expository writing. All expository writing. The only type of writing you will be doing in this class is expository. Your anecdote was probably more narrative, but from this point forward, the only type of writing you will be doing is considered expository writing. So dividing up your ideas is a very good strategy. If you want to write the Chick-fil-A is the best fast food restaurant in America essay, you're going to divide the rest of the essay up into your three main points, right? The price, the taste, and the service. Divided up your reasons. Does that make sense? It's pretty basic. Very basic strategy. Okay, I have an example for you to look at. And for the people that just view the recording, they will have to access it through the week 4 folder. But I'm going to give you this example. It's called A Plan for College Affordability. This is from a speech that was delivered just a couple of weeks ago in Buffalo, New York by the president, who has a plan for college affordability. So take a few minutes and read through this. It's 4 pages, front and back of each of those 2 pages there. And then we're going to talk about it. But see if you can see how the president uses this strategy of division. See if you can find some key words that indicate he's using this strategy in the speech. We can talk about the validity of the argument too if you want to. If you read it and see stuff that doesn't make sense or stuff that does make sense, we can talk about that as well. But I'm mostly concerned about the strategy that he used. So look for keywords that indicate the strategy that he's using. One more. All right, let's talk about what you read. Does anybody have a thesis statement for this? How about this? What's the subject? of the speech? Say it again. College affordability. That's pretty good. Is there an opinion expressed? What do you think the opinion is? Okay, good. So here's what I came up with. Is pretty much what you just said. The subject I think is college education. Now the problem is this is not necessarily expository writing. This was not necessarily based on a thesis statement. But if we have to come up with a thesis statement, we probably can do it. I think this is more of an informational, like the informational text or speech, right? We said that there are three main purposes for writing: to inform, to persuade, or to entertain. I don't think the goal of the speech was to entertain. This is only part of it. There is some introductory material where he kind of cracks a few jokes, and that may have been meant to entertain. But the purpose, I think, is more to just inform the audience and the whole country that the president has a plan for making college more affordable. So that's why it's difficult to find a thesis to begin with. But if we had to, if there was some kind of persuasive element going on here, I would say the subject is probably college education, and the opinion is that it can and should be made more affordable. Does that make sense? That's pretty much what you just said. All right, so if there was a thesis statement, that's what it would be. Now, he chose to use the strategy of dividing. I think he had to. Where does he indicate this? Where does he indicate that he's dividing? There we go, fourth paragraph. So let me be specific. My plan comes down to three main goals, right? Fourth paragraph. Look at the next word after that. First. That's organizing, right? First. Here's part number one. Look at the next paragraph. Number two. We're going to blah, blah, blah. Next paragraph. And the third. Blah, blah, blah. So it's broken down into three main parts, and he clearly indicates this throughout the speech. He comes back to that same strategy. Page 3. Actually, go back to page 1. I'm sorry. Go back to page 1. So he says, paragraph, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Second from the bottom, our first priority. So he's going back to this list of three, right? He says, here they are in brief bullet points. And then in the third from the bottom, he says, so let me just talk about each of these briefly. Our first priority. So he talks all about the first one on page 1 and page 2. When you get to page 3, the second paragraph, the second thing we want to do. So he's following the same thing he laid out at the beginning of the speech, which is a good way to give information, especially when it's a speech rather than an actual document. You want to tell the audience what you're going to tell them. You want to tell them, and then you want to tell them what you told them. Does that make sense? You want to tell them what you're going to tell them. You want to tell them, and then you want to tell them what you told them. So he follows that. He says, I have three main goals. 1, 2, and 3. First, blah, 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 blah. Second, on page 3, the second thing we want to do is blah, blah, blah. And then, is it page, oh no, still on page 3, third paragraph from the bottom. The third thing, and then he talks in detail about the third thing. Now when you get to page 4, look at the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth paragraph. Now if we move forward on these three fronts, 1, increasing value, 2, encouraging innovation, 3, helping people responsibly manage their debt. There they are again, right? So he frames his whole speech by saying, here's what I'm going to do, 1, 2, 3. Here's everything I have to say about 1, everything I have to say about 2, everything I have to say about 3. Here's what I hope you remember, 1, 2, 3, right? That's how you give an effective speech. Yes. Kind of. When you think block pattern, think when you're comparing and contrasting though. So in this case, he's not really comparing and contrasting things. He just has his plan. If he were comparing it to someone else's plan, he might be using a block pattern. But since he's not really comparing and contrasting, just think of it as dividing his idea into 3 parts. That's all he's really doing. And he did it 3 times because he breaks it up at the intro, breaks it up in the body, and then at the conclusion he shows you the 3 different parts. Does that make sense? Yes? Did anybody have any thoughts about the actual plan itself? Any concerns? It would be good if they could get it in place, yeah. Everything sounds good, right? Looks good on paper. The one thing that I have an issue with, if you look at the bottom of page 1, he's talking about his first priority, which is rating colleges, not just by which college is the most selective, not just by which college is the most expensive, not just by which college has the nicest facilities. You can get all of this on the existing rating systems. What we want to do is rate them on who's offering the best value so students and taxpayers get a bigger bang for their buck. That sounds good, right? Rating colleges. And when he says rating colleges, he's talking about the federal government rating them. So Lanier Tech could potentially be rated higher than Harvard because maybe you get better value for your money. Now, what's the point of doing that? Like, so what? So the colleges are rated. Well, the idea is it gives prospective students a better picture of what colleges are going to give them for their money, but it also determines how much money each college receives from the federal government. So public schools like Lanier Tech gets money from the state government and the federal government. That's why we're a state institution. That's why I'm a state employee, because we're partially funded by the state. Now, the state and the federal funding is drying up. I think the president told us last year that Lanier Tech used to be about 70% funded by taxpayer dollars, federal and state, and 30% by tuition. That's pretty much flip-flopped. Now we're funded 70% by student tuition, 30% by taxpayer dollars. So this rating system that he's talking about, it's not just to give students an idea of what college is going to give you a better return for your money. It also has to do with who gets federal dollars and who doesn't. So if the college is ranked low, if it's ranked poorly, that would mean that college doesn't receive as much or doesn't receive any taxpayer money. That makes sense, right? Like, if it's not a good school, if it's not giving their students a good return for their investment, then they shouldn't be getting taxpayer money. Okay, I'm okay with that, but then at the bottom of page 1, he says, so rating these colleges, that means metrics, things they can measure, like how much debt does the average student leave with? That seems like a good thing to measure. I left my undergrad with a whole bunch of debt. And I think that the school that I went to should be penalized for that. All right, that's, it should be affordable. That's the whole goal, right? Make it affordable. All right, the next one, how easy is it to pay off? That should be important too. What kind of programs are the schools offering, to help with loans? What are the rates on the loans that they're offering? If you go to a private college as opposed to a public university or college, the rate you get on a student loan could be a lot higher. Like if you decided to attend like University of Phoenix or DeVry, those are private for-profit colleges. They don't have access to federal loans where you can take out a loan at like 2% or 3%. If you go to some of these other for-profit schools, the loan rates might be 6 or 8 or 10 or 12%, which means you're paying back a lot more over time. All right, so that's important too. But look at the next one. How many students graduate on time? That's a problem. That's a problem for me. That's a problem for Lanier Tech. Problem for you. How many people here work full-time? How many people work part-time? Is that going to make it more difficult for you to graduate, quote-unquote, on time? If you're enrolled in an associate's degree program, what is on-time graduation? What is it supposed to be? 2 years. It's difficult to work full-time or part-time and graduate in 2 years and take care of a family or whatever else you're doing. So should Lanier Tech be punished for that? That's what his plan is saying. His plan is saying that's one of the measurements they're going to use. It's not the only measurement, but that's one. So Lanier Tech is going to be penalized because people don't graduate, quote unquote, on time. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I don't see that as a fair metric or measurement. There are reasons why he's doing this. Some schools want to keep their students longer because that means they collect more money from them. They want to keep the students in school. That's not our goal here. Our goal, our mission has actually been to try and get people through their programs faster, to get them out into the working world faster, but it's difficult to do. Say it again. There are other problems too. Raise your hand if you're planning on transferring to another school at some point. Keep your hand up if you're planning on transferring to another school before you finish a program here. You know what that means? That means you didn't graduate on time from linear tech. Is that our fault? Shouldn't be your fault either. You should be free to go whatever school you want to go to. But if they don't factor in these ideas like is a school transferring students to other schools, if we don't get credit for that, we're going to get hurt. And if we lose federal funding, guess what that means? Bingo. Higher tuition for other students. And that's the opposite of what his plan is trying to do. Does that make sense? So if we lose federal funding because we're held accountable for the fact that people come here and work full-time jobs and weren't planning on graduating within 2 years, we lose that funding, tuition goes up. College becomes less affordable. Does that make sense? All right. So that's kind of my soapbox for the day anyway. But I try to pull articles that are from the news and recent and apply to you, which this one definitely does. You know, it applies to you right now. It applies to you for next year. You know, after this program gets in effect, if you want to know why the college is trying to encourage you to, you know, take a full load of classes, because that's what as advisors we're trying to do, is, you know, encourage students to take full loads regardless of their situation outside of school. It's because we're going to be measured on the fact that you either did or did not graduate on time. And if you don't graduate on time, we could lose money. So if you want to know why your advisor is trying to push you that way, and if your advisor isn't sure, now you know, right? Because it's part of this overall plan. Yes? Possibly. Yeah. That's a good thought. Yeah, you're right.
Why can't they take into account that, yeah, we have full-time attending students, they need to pay on time, but what about those of us that are actually only attending part-time?
I don't know, but my fear is that they're not making a differentiation. And my fear is that they're saying, we don't care whether they're part-time or full-time. If they're part-time, get them to full-time. That's the push right now. I don't know what to tell you. I understand. Hey, I understand. Yes. Say it again. It's politics. I mean, definition of politics is who gets what, when, and where. The repayment plan. Well, maybe not. This is only part of the speech. Right. Right. Yeah, there are a number of different